How dare you protect this girl?
She is with me now.
The marble floor of the CO estate's east corridor was cold enough that Narai could feel it through her knees, even after 3 years of kneeling on it. She wasn't scrubbing anything urgent, just a coffee ring left on the runner rug, the kind no one would notice but her. That was the job. Notice what no one else would. She didn't hear him arrive. CO Jae-hoon rarely made noise when it mattered. He stood in the doorway of his own home like a man checking whether it was safe to enter, tie already loosened, jacket over one arm, the exhaustion of a 14-hour board meeting still pulling at his shoulders. He should have walked past her. He always walked past her. Instead, he stopped. "You're here late," he said, not a question, almost an accusation. "Someone spilled something," Narai answered, not looking up. "It'll be gone in a minute." He didn't move. Something in his chest, small, unfamiliar, unwelcome, tightened at the sight of her still working at 9 at night while his own family slept upstairs, oblivious. He told himself it was concern for an employee's well-being. He almost believed it. "Leave it," he said quietly. "It's late enough." Narai finally looked up, surprised not by the words, but by the fact that he'd said them at all. Wait until you see what Jae-hoon does when everyone else finally notices what he's been hiding for months. Eyes, who else thinks Narai deserves better than being invisible? Let us know below and subscribe so you don't miss chapter 2. Yellow heart, also like and subscribe. She had no way of knowing that this small, quiet moment, barely 30 seconds long, would be the first thread in a secret that neither of them was ready to unravel. Morning at the CO estate began the same way every day. Before the family woke, before the gates opened, before anyone thought to look. Narai moved through the halls like part of the architecture, polishing banisters no one touched, arranging flowers no one thanked her for, refilling water glasses that emptied themselves as far as anyone upstairs was concerned. Invisibility wasn't cruelty here. It was simply how the house worked. She had made peace with that months ago. What she hadn't made peace with was Jae-hoon. He wasn't unkind. He barely spoke to her at all, which was, in its own way, ordinary. Employers didn't make conversation with housekeeping staff, but lately she'd catch him watching the space she'd just left, as if trying to reconstruct something he'd missed. Today it was small. She'd left a cup of barley tea on the study's side table, the way she did every afternoon, and turned to go. "You always make it the same way," Jae-hoon said, not looking up from his documents. Narai paused in the doorway. "Sir." Weak, barely steeped, he finally glanced at her. Most people like it stronger. She hadn't realized he noticed what was in the cup, let alone how it tasted. "My father drank it that way," she said carefully. "I suppose I never unlearned it." Something shifted behind his eyes, brief, unreadable, gone before she could name it. "Noted," he said, and returned to his papers. It wasn't much. A single sentence, forgotten by most people the moment it left their mouths. But Narai walked back to the kitchen, turning it over like a stone in her pocket, unsure why it mattered that he'd asked at all. She didn't see him. 10 minutes later, staring at the closed door she'd left through, turning that same sentence over himself. "My father drank it that way." He didn't know her father's name, didn't know if he was alive, or when he died, or what kind of man made his daughter memorize a stranger's tea preference out of grief instead of habit. He had no right to wonder. He reminded himself of that. He wondered anyway. That night, alone in his study long after the house had gone quiet, Jae-hoon found himself doing something he couldn't explain and wouldn't have admitted to anyone, writing a single line in the corner of his private notebook, the kind of detail he never bothered to keep. Barley tea, weak, her father's habit. He stared at it for a long moment, then closed the notebook as if that would be enough to make him forget he'd written it at all. The car in the driveway was the first sign. Sleek, foreign, unmistakably expensive, and parked exactly where Jae-hoon's mother always told guests not to park. Narai noticed it from the kitchen window and thought nothing of it. Wealthy visitors were not unusual here. What was unusual was the way the household staff straightened the moment the name reached them. "Hyi's here," one of the housekeepers murmured, adjusting her apron like it mattered. Ms. Yoon, she used to practically live in this house. Narai didn't ask who Hyin was. She didn't need to. Something in the way people said the name told her enough. By the time she carried a tray of tea into the sitting room, Hyin was already seated across from Jae-hoon's mother, laughing at something with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. She wore her confidence the way other people wore perfume quietly, but impossible not to notice. Jae-hoon, his mother said warmly, look who came to see us. He appeared in the doorway a moment later, and Narai, setting the tray down, felt rather than saw him go still. Hyin, his voice was even, careful, the voice of a man choosing each word before he let it out. You look surprised, Hyin said, rising to embrace him lightly. I told your mother I'd visit months ago. Did she not mention it? She didn't. Well, Hyirin's smile didn't waver. Now you know. Narai moved to leave, but Hyirin's gaze caught her first sweeping over her uniform, her lowered eyes, the empty tray in her hands, cataloging her in the space of 2 seconds the way people catalog furniture. New girl, Hyin asked Jae-hoon's mother, though her eyes stayed on Narai. Narai's been with us almost a year, his mother said. A year, Hyirin's tone was pleasant, measured, the kind of pleasant that had edges, and I've never noticed her once. It wasn't cruel, exactly. It wasn't anything Narai could point to and call an insult. But she felt Jae-hoon's attention shift toward her quick, involuntary, gone before his mother could see it, and Hyin saw it too. Her smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened, like a door quietly closing on a room she intended to search later. How lovely, Hyin said softly, that some people finally get noticed. Narai bowed and left the room. She didn't look back, but she felt the weight of that sentence follow her the entire way down the hall, and somehow she understood it wasn't really about her at all. The change started small enough that no one noticed at first, not even Narai. The household had a rule older than her employment. Staff ate after the family in the back kitchen once the dining room had been cleared. It was efficient. No one had ever questioned it. Until the day Jae-hoon walked into the kitchen at noon, glanced at the staff eating standing up around the counter, and said mildly, "There are empty chairs in the breakfast room." The head housekeeper blinked. "Sir." "Use them. No reason people should eat on their feet in a house this size." It wasn't aimed at anyone. He didn't look at Narai when he said it. But she was the one who'd been on her feet the longest that week, and the timing wasn't lost on the staff who exchanged glances behind his back. Small things followed. The uniform order changed better fabric, he said, citing something about the previous supplier's quality. The schedule shifted so the person closing up the east wing at night wasn't left to walk to the staff gate alone in the dark. He mentioned it to the house manager as a security concern, nothing more. No one could point to a single decision and call it strange. But added together, the staff began to notice a pattern they didn't have a name for yet. Narai noticed too. She said nothing. What was there to say thank you for the chairs? It would have made it bigger than it was. So she let it sit, unspoken, the way she let most things sit. But Jae-hoon's mother noticed differently. She found him in his study that evening, reviewing the same shift schedule he'd already approved twice. "You changed the closing rotation," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Again. It made sense. "You've made several things make sense lately." She studied him with the particular patience of a woman who had watched her son build walls for years and knew exactly what it looked like when one shifted. New uniforms, meal arrangements, a security review no one asked for. "The house runs better this way." "Jae-hoon," she said his name gently, but it landed like a door closing softly instead of slamming, somehow more final. "I've known you your whole life. You don't fix things that aren't broken unless something's made you look at them differently." He didn't answer right away. And in the silence, his mother's expression shifted from curiosity into something quieter, more careful, the look of a woman beginning to suspect a truth her son wasn't ready to say out loud. "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" she asked. Kim Do-jin had spent 18 years as the Seo family's attorney learning which files deserved a second glance. This one deserved more than that. It started as routine due diligence, a background check on new staff, the kind of formality no one ever expected to turn up anything. He'd run Narai's name mostly out of habit, expecting nothing but a clean, unremarkable record. Instead, one line in an old case index stopped him cold. Lee Kang-woo v. Seo Industries, filed 11 years ago, withdrawn. He sat back in his chair, the fluorescent light of his office humming overhead, and stared at the name until it stopped looking like a coincidence. Lee, Narai's father. He pulled the archived file, blowing a decade of dust off a case he barely remembered handling, a wrongful termination and safety violation claim brought by a mid-level engineer against the company, years before Jae-hoon had taken over operations. The case had vanished quietly, withdrawn without settlement, without explanation, buried under a company restructuring that gave everyone convenient reasons to stop asking questions. Do-jin remembered vague details now, resurfacing like silt stirred from a riverbed. A whistleblower complaint, allegations that never made it to court, a family that disappeared from the record entirely. And a daughter, currently changing linens in the Seo family's East Wing. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent his career protecting a family that didn't always deserve protecting. If this was coincidence, it was the kind that came back to bite people. And if it wasn't? He didn't let himself finish that thought yet. Do-jin had known Jae-hoon since he was a boy, trailing his father through boardrooms too big for him. He'd watched him become a careful, guarded man who trusted almost no one completely, and Do-jin had earned a rare piece of that trust over 2 decades of loyalty. He wasn't going to spend it carelessly on a half-formed suspicion. He closed the file, but didn't file it away. Instead, he locked it in his desk drawer, the old case number staring up at him like an unanswered question. Coincidence, he told himself, or consequence? He needed to know which before he said a word to Jae-hoon, or to anyone. Because if this was what he feared it might be, the truth wouldn't just complicate a company's old legal history. It would upend the fragile trust, quietly growing under his employer's own roof. Do-jin picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years, an old contact, who might still have access to records that had conveniently gone missing. Some questions, he'd learned, were too dangerous to ask directly. Not yet. Narai kept her father's photograph in the bottom of her bag, not because she needed to look at it often, but because she needed to know it was there. He'd been an engineer, careful, principled, the kind of man who read contracts twice and still asked questions. She remembered him mostly in fragments now, his laugh, low and unhurried, the smell of machine oil on his hands after work, the way he used to say do the right thing even when no one's counting, like it was the only inheritance he had to give her. He'd died believing he'd lost everything fighting for something he thought mattered. Narai had spent the years since trying not to resent him for it, for the debt, for the small apartment she and her mother had shrunk their lives into, for the education she'd quietly set aside to start working sooner. The Seo estate paid well, and it asked nothing of her but her labor and her silence. That had seemed like a fair trade. She hadn't expected anything more from it. Hadn't wanted anything more. If she was honest, wanting things from people like this only led to disappointment. So when Jae-hoon appeared in the kitchen doorway that afternoon holding a small paper bag, she assumed it was for someone else. "For you," he said, setting it on the counter before she could ask. "Barley tea, better quality than what we usually stock." She stared at it, then at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." He didn't elaborate, didn't wait for gratitude. He was already turning to leave when he added, almost carelessly, "You said your father drank it that way. Seemed easier to bring the good kind than keep serving you the cheap one." He was gone before she could respond. Narai stood alone in the kitchen, holding a small bag of tea like it was something fragile. It wasn't the gift itself. It was that he'd remembered not just the detail, but the reason behind it, the quiet grief she hadn't meant to hand him at all. No one asked about her father anymore. No one remembered anything about her long enough for it to matter. She sat down slowly, the bag still in her hands, and let herself feel something she'd trained herself out of months ago, the small, dangerous hope that maybe, in this house full of people who looked past her, one person had actually been looking. She didn't know yet what to do with that. The garden was Narai's favorite part of the estate to close down at night, quiet, unwatched, the koi pond throwing soft light across the stone path. She hadn't expected company. Hyin was sitting on the low wall near the water, jacket discarded beside him, looking less like the man who ran boardrooms and more like someone who'd simply run out of places to be alone. "You should be inside," he said without turning. "So should you," she hesitated, then sat, careful to leave space between them that felt deliberate in a way neither of them acknowledged. "Rough day." "Long one," he exhaled, watching the koi drift beneath the surface. "My mother keeps asking questions I don't have good answers for." "About what?" "Everything lately." A pause. "Mostly about why I've started paying attention to things I used to ignore." Narai kept her eyes on the water. "Is that a bad thing, paying attention?" "I used to think it made me weak." He said it quietly, like a confession he hadn't planned on making. "Caring about things, people. It's easier to run a company, a life, if nothing can be used against you." "And now?" He turned to look at her, and for a moment the careful distance he kept with everyone seemed to falter. "Now I'm not sure what I think anymore." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that asked a question neither of them was ready to answer aloud. Narai felt her own heartbeat in her throat, felt the strange gravity of a moment she hadn't invited and didn't want to end. "Narai," Hyin started, his voice lower now, stripped of its usual composure. "There's something I should probably—" "Hyin." Hyirin's voice cut across the garden like a blade through silk, bright and pleasant on the surface, sharp underneath. She stood at the edge of the path in a pale coat, arms crossed loosely, watching the two of them with an expression that missed nothing: the closeness, the interrupted sentence, the way Narai immediately straightened and put distance between them out of old habit. "I was looking everywhere for you," Hyin said, walking toward them with unhurried confidence. Her eyes flicked to Narai, then back to Hyin, lingering just long enough to make her point. "Am I interrupting something?" Hyin stood, the moment gone as quickly as it had opened. "No," he said, "nothing important." Narai said nothing, but she felt the word nothing land somewhere it shouldn't have and understood, watching Hyirin's satisfied smile, that whatever had almost been said tonight had just been buried under something far more dangerous than silence. Hyin didn't believe in coincidence. She believed in patterns, and the pattern of Hyun's sudden, uncharacteristic attentiveness toward a housekeeper had bothered her enough to make a few quiet calls of her own. It took less effort than she expected. A former colleague in corporate legal owed her a favor, and one afternoon over coffee, that favor produced a name she hadn't been looking for and couldn't stop staring at once she found it. Lee Kangwoo, wrongful termination suit against CO Industries, withdrawn 11 years ago. Same surname as the girl, currently pouring tea in Hyun's sitting room. Hyin sat with the information for 2 days before deciding what to do with it. She wasn't a cruel woman, whatever people assumed. But she understood leverage, and she understood that Hyun, for all his composure, had never once looked at her the way she'd caught him looking at Narai in that garden. That wasn't something she was prepared to lose to a maid with a convenient last name. She found Narai alone in the linen room, folding towels with the quiet focus of someone who'd learned to make herself small in every room she entered. "Lee Narai," Hyin said the full name deliberately, watching it land. "That's an interesting family history you have." Narai's hands stilled. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Your father, Kangwoo, wasn't it? He sued this family once." Hyin tilted her head, almost gentle, almost not. "And now his daughter just happens to be cleaning their floors, getting suspiciously close to the heir. You can see how that looks." "It isn't like that." Narai's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I didn't even know about any lawsuit until—" "Until what?" "Until it was convenient to know." Hyirin's smile stayed pleasant, which somehow made it worse. I don't actually care what your intentions are, but I imagine Jae-hoon's mother would find it fascinating. So would the board if it came to that. She let the silence stretch, satisfied, before turning to leave. You should decide what you're going to say before someone else tells it for you. Narai stood alone among the folded towels long after Hyirin's footsteps faded, her pulse loud in her ears. She had never once used her father's name to get close to anyone in this house. But she understood, with sudden cold clarity, that the truth wouldn't matter nearly as much as who told it first, and Hyin had just made certain it wouldn't be her. The anniversary dinner had been planned for months, the CO family's annual gathering of board members, old family friends, and the kind of polished small talk Narai usually only witnessed from the edges of a room while refilling glasses. She hadn't expected to become the evening's subject. It happened over dessert, in the lull between courses, when Hyin rose with her wine glass in hand and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Before we finish the evening, she said, voice carrying easily across the table, I think there's something the family should know about your newest addition to staff. Jae-hoon's mother frowned. Hyin. Her father sued this company 11 years ago. Hyin let the words settle over the table like frost. And now, his daughter is working in this house, growing remarkably close to the heir. I simply think that deserves an explanation. Silence dropped over the table, thick and airless. Narai, standing near the sideboard with a tray in her hands, felt every eye turn toward her at once, the board members, the family friends, Jae-hoon's mother's stunned, searching face. Is this true? His mother asked quietly. I didn't know, Narai said, her voice unsteady but clear. About the lawsuit, not until a few days ago, I swear I never. How convenient, Hyin murmured, just loud enough to be heard. Every instinct told Narai to keep explaining, to fight the current pulling her under. But the words dried up in her throat, drowned by the weight of a dozen unfamiliar faces waiting to decide who she was. She looked at Jae-hoon. He hadn't moved. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed somewhere between Narai and the table, unreadable in a way she'd never seen from him before, not the careful composure she'd learned to read, but something closer to paralysis. His mother watched him too, waiting. The board watched him. Hyin watched him with quiet, patient satisfaction, certain of what his silence would cost. Jae-hoon, his mother said carefully, say something. He opened his mouth, and for one unbearable second, said nothing at all. Narai felt something inside her go very still, bracing for whichever version of him was about to answer. The man who'd remembered her father's tea, or the heir who couldn't afford, in front of everyone who mattered to his family's name, to choose her. The silence stretched a heartbeat too long. And no one in that room, least of all Narai, knew which man was going to speak first. Jae-hoon rose from his chair. The movement alone silenced the room faster than any words could have. He walked, not to the head of the table where his mother sat waiting, but toward Narai, closing the distance Hyin had spent the whole evening trying to widen. She didn't know about the lawsuit, he said, his voice steady now, stripped of the hesitation that had gripped him moments before. I didn't either, until recently, and even if she had known, that wouldn't make her responsible for something her father did 11 years ago. Jae-hoon, his mother started carefully, the board will want. The board can want whatever it likes. He didn't raise his voice, but something in it left no room for argument. If this family owes an apology to anyone tonight, it's to Kang-woo Lee's family, for however his case was buried, not the other way around. Hyirin's composure flickered just slightly. You're really choosing this over. I'm not choosing anything over anyone. He turned to face her directly. I'm telling the truth, something I should have done days ago, instead of letting silence do the talking for me. He turned back to Narai, and for the first time since Hyirin's accusation, his expression softened into something unguarded, something the whole room could see, and he no longer seemed to care. I should have said this earlier, he said quietly. You were never invisible to me, not once. Narai felt her throat tighten, the weight of months of being overlooked finally loosening its grip. I didn't need rescuing, she said, her voice trembling but clear. I needed someone to actually see me. That's different. I know, he said. That's what I'm trying to do now. His mother watched the exchange with something shifting behind her eyes, surprise giving way, slowly, to quiet understanding. Hyin said nothing more. She simply gathered her coat and left the room, her silence the loudest concession she had left to give. Later, standing together on the terrace as the guests dispersed, Narai finally let herself believe what she'd been afraid to hope for, that being seen wasn't something she had to earn by staying quiet. It was something she deserved simply by being honest. So, Jae-hoon said, the corner of his mouth lifting for the first time all night. Where do we go from here? Narai smiled, steadier now than she'd felt in months. Together, I hope, if you're willing to actually talk this time instead of just noticing. Yellow Heart, what did you take from Narai and Jae-hoon's story? This journey was about more than romance. It was a reminder that true worth isn't granted by status or wealth, but recognized through honesty, patience, and the courage to be truly seen. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak the truth before someone else tells it for us. If this story moved you, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe for more emotional, original romance dramas, new chapters every week. Dizzy.